There's a phone call you can ignore once, twice, maybe even 10 times, but eventually, you stop ignoring it. You block the number, you skip Thanksgiving, you stop explaining yourself. And one day, you realize something that feels almost impossible to admit. You don't want to go home anymore. Not because you hate your family, not because you suddenly became selfish, and not necessarily because something dramatic happened. Sometimes you just got tired. Tired of explaining. Tired of being misunderstood. Tired of having the same argument in different forms for 20 years. And then comes the question that makes everything worse. How could you do this to your own family? Because in America, we're taught something very early. Family is forever. Forgive your parents, keep the peace, show up for Thanksgiving, don't embarrass the family, and above all, blood is thicker than water. So when someone walks away from their family, people usually ask, what did they do that was so terrible? But here's the part most people don't understand. Sometimes, the final straw isn't what broke the relationship. It was simply the moment the person finally realized it had been broken for years. Hi, I'm Ponder, and today on Beyond Every Answer, we're going inside the psychology of people who cut off contact with their families and the 4 stages many people pass through before they finally say, I can't do this anymore. Stage 1, the paper cuts. Most family estrangement doesn't begin with a dramatic explosion. It begins with something much quieter, a comment, a joke, a criticism, a boundary being ignored, a parent constantly mocking your career, a family member refusing to accept your partner, someone saying, that's just how your father is, or you're too sensitive. You let it go because it's family. Then it happens again and again and again. One incident doesn't necessarily destroy a relationship, but imagine experiencing hundreds of tiny moments like that over 10, 20, or 30 years. That's the psychological equivalent of a relationship accumulating paper cuts. Each one seems too small to justify walking away. So you keep saying, it's not that serious, until one day you notice something strange. You're driving toward your hometown, and your stomach tightens. You're sitting at the dinner table, and you're already rehearsing what you're going to say. You're checking your phone before sending a completely normal message because you're wondering, how are they going to react to this? That's when the problem isn't just the argument anymore. Your brain has started associating the relationship itself with stress. And this creates the first major shift. You stop asking, was that bad enough? And you start asking, why do I always feel like this around them? Stage 2, the role you never chose. Here's where family psychology gets really interesting. In some dysfunctional families, children don't simply grow up. They get assigned roles. Maybe you're the golden child, the successful one, the one whose achievements make the family look good. So when you choose a career they don't approve of, suddenly you're wasting your potential. Maybe you're the scapegoat, the person who says the uncomfortable thing nobody else wants to say. You point out the drinking, the constant fighting, the favoritism, the emotional manipulation, and somehow you become the problem. Then there's the invisible child. You learned very early that having needs created problems. So you became quiet, independent, easy. You stopped asking for things. And perhaps the most exhausting role of all, the parentified child, the kid who became the therapist, the mediator, the peacekeeper, the one sitting between mom and dad thinking, how do I stop them from fighting? And here's the trap. When that child grows up, moves away, gets a partner, gets therapy, or simply starts saying no, the family system can experience that independence as rejection. Because the person isn't just changing their behavior, they're changing the role they've played for years. And sometimes the family doesn't know how to relate to the new version of them. So the boundary gets interpreted as betrayal. After everything we've done for you, you think you're better than us now? Your therapist has brainwashed you. And suddenly, a boundary becomes a family war. Stage 3, the hope trap. But here's the question. If the relationship has been painful for so long, why don't people leave sooner? Because they keep hoping, and hope is powerful. Maybe this Christmas will be different. Maybe mom will finally listen. Maybe dad will finally apologize. Maybe if I explain it one more time, they'll understand. And sometimes they do. That's what makes it even harder. Because toxic relationships aren't necessarily painful every second. There can be warmth, a birthday call, a childhood memory, a random hug, a moment where everything feels normal again. And your brain thinks, see? Maybe there's still a chance. This is where intermittent reinforcement becomes important. Unpredictable moments of warmth can make people hold on to relationships much longer than consistent rejection would. It's the emotional equivalent of waiting for a slot machine to finally pay out. You keep thinking, maybe the next time will be different. So you try harder, you explain more, you become more patient, you change yourself, you forgive, again and again, until eventually, something changes. Not necessarily them, you. You realize you've spent years trying to earn a version of the relationship that may never exist. And that's when hope turns into something psychologists sometimes describe as a hope trap. Because now you're no longer hoping for what the relationship actually is. You're hoping for what you desperately wish it could become. And one day, you stop bringing a bucket to an empty well. Stage 4. The grief nobody sees. This is the part outsiders often completely misunderstand. Someone cuts contact, and people think, good, problem solved. But psychologically, it can be incredibly complicated. Because you haven't necessarily stopped loving the person. You may have stopped being able to have a relationship with them. And those are two very different things. You can miss someone and still know you shouldn't be around them. You can love your parents and still need distance. You can feel relief and grief at the exact same time. This is where the concept of ambiguous loss becomes important. You're grieving someone who is still alive. There's no funeral, no ceremony, no socially recognized ending. Your mother is still posting birthday pictures. Your father is still living in the same house. Your siblings are still having Christmas dinner, but you're no longer part of that world. And sometimes the hardest thing isn't losing the relationship. It's losing the fantasy that one day the relationship would finally become what you needed it to be. That's a different kind of grief. You're not just grieving the person. You're grieving the childhood you wanted, the apology you never received, the parent you kept hoping they'd become, the family gathering you imagined you'd eventually have. And that's why walking away can feel both devastating and strangely peaceful. The part people get wrong. Now, here's something important. Not everyone who cuts off their family is automatically right, and not every difficult parent is abusive. Sometimes people become estranged because of misunderstandings. Sometimes both sides contribute. Sometimes temporary distance is healthier than permanent no contact. And sometimes, especially when there is genuine abuse, manipulation, or repeated violations of boundaries, distance can be necessary. The point isn't cut off your family. The point is understanding why someone might feel they have no other option. Because from the outside, estrangement can look like rejection. From the inside, it can feel like survival. Conclusion. Choosing yourself. Maybe family is supposed to be forever, but that doesn't mean every family relationship is supposed to stay the same forever. People change, roles change, boundaries change. And sometimes, growing up means realizing you don't have to keep playing the role you were assigned as a child. You are allowed to grieve. You're allowed to miss people. You're allowed to wish things had been different. And you're also allowed to build something healthier, a chosen family, friends who listen, a partner who respects you, people who don't require you to become smaller just to keep the peace. Because DNA can make people related, but safety, respect, accountability, and love are what make a relationship feel like family. So, if you've ever wondered why someone could walk away from their own family, remember this. People rarely wake up one morning and stop caring. Sometimes, they spend years caring too much, until finally, they realize that protecting their peace isn't betrayal, it's a boundary. And sometimes the hardest goodbye is the one you had to say while the person was still alive. If this video gave you a different perspective on family estrangement, subscribe to Beyond Every Answer. Because sometimes understanding human behavior starts with asking a question nobody else wants to ask.